Hello. My name's Seraphine Archer, and last Thanksgiving, my sister demanded I kneel before 300 guests. 10 seconds later, the FBI crashed our dinner. The sound didn't register right away. Not the crash of the glass, not the collective gasp of 300 people inhaling at once. What I noticed first was the temperature shift, the subtle drop in the air as everyone's eyes turned toward me. Red wine bled across the front of Callista's white Chanel. She stood at the head of the table, all angles and ice, her expression unreadable until her lips parted. "Kneel," she said, loud enough to silence the string quartet. "Apologize." The words settled like dust on polished mahogany. My ears buzzed, but her voice cut through like broken crystal. I didn't move. Couldn't. Not because I was afraid, but because my body had finally learned the language of refusal. After decades of yes, of swallowing the bitter, of stepping aside so she could shine. From where I sat, I could see the slight shift in her shoulders, calculated fury masked in poise. She wasn't asking. She was staging. She wanted a scene. I was just the prop. My hands curled around the linen napkin on my lap, the only thing grounding me. I hadn't touched my food. My appetite disappeared the moment she'd made her toast, sweet, saccharine, performative, about family unity. The same family that never quite had room for me unless they needed a scapegoat or silence. Someone laughed awkwardly. The quartet faltered. The room turned heavy. I looked up. Her smile was thin now. Patient. "I said," she repeated, louder this time, "kneel. Apologize for ruining my dress." I stood slowly, chair legs scraping the hardwood. A hush fell deeper. Callista tilted her head as if enjoying a private joke. My knees didn't buckle. My spine held. "No," I said. The air shifted again, this time sharper, colder. Her expression faltered, not from shock, but disbelief. "No," she repeated, almost amused. I didn't blink. "You heard me." The tension snapped like a violin string. Plates clinked. A fork dropped. Someone whispered, "Did she just?" Callista's face contorted, just briefly. Like something cracked beneath the surface. My mother, 2 seats down, opened her mouth then closed it again. Her husband, I stopped calling him Dad years ago, stared at his plate like the linen pattern held answers. And me? I was still standing. Still breathing. The moment stretched. "You've embarrassed this entire family," Callista hissed. "You always find a way to make it about you." That wasn't new. That accusation had lived in my bones since we were children. Every time I asked to be heard, I was told I was dramatic. Every time I cried, I was called manipulative. I remembered my 16th birthday, how the cake had her name on it, by mistake. How my first job at the company disappeared when she decided she wanted the title instead. How every holiday, I was seated near the kitchen, next to the help, like a placeholder no one could quite remove. I had been invisible so long, I started to think it was my fault. That maybe quiet was the only safe way to exist. But not tonight. Callista's breath was shallow now, her fury seeping through the cracks in her mascara and highlighter. "Apologize," she repeated. "Don't make me tell you again." I didn't. I didn't make her do anything. She made her own choices. And I was done being the backdrop. "I'm not here to kneel," I said, louder this time. "I'm here to be seen." Her laugh was brittle. "You think you're making some kind of statement?" "No," I said. "I'm making a decision." For the first time in my life, my voice didn't shake. She took a step forward, then another, heels clicking like gunshots on the marble. "What's wrong with you?" she asked, quieter now but sharper. "This is my night. My guests. My house." I looked around. Eyes were on me. Not her. And that was the real offense. I didn't answer her. There was nothing left to say. She'd built her image like a fortress, charming, successful, benevolent. But she forgot the cracks beneath the marble always show when the pressure rises. She reached out, maybe to grab my arm, maybe to point again, but she didn't get the chance. The door slammed open. A voice thundered across the room. "Federal agents. Step back." It was like someone hit pause on a movie. Movement froze. The air turned electric. I turned just in time to see them, badges out, voices calm but firm, cutting through the shock. The lead agent scanned the room, then walked toward her with practiced calm. "Callista Vance?" She turned pale. "What is this?" she barked. "There's been a mistake." No, ma'am, the agent said. You're under arrest. Charges include wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. You have the right to remain silent. The rest blurred. She didn't scream. She didn't faint. She just stood there, hands limp, mouth ajar. Her husband stepped back. No one moved to help. I watched as the cuffs closed around her wrists, as the perfect lines of her evening gown twisted beneath the tension. She turned to me, not with rage, but with confusion. Like I had rewritten the script and forgotten to give her the new lines. This is your doing, she whispered. I met her gaze and said nothing. Because it wasn't mine. It was hers all along. As the agents led her away, the room stayed still. The music had long stopped. No one raised a glass. No one dared to breathe. I stood alone in the silence she left behind. And for the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. When the agents took her away, the murmurs started again, small, nervous sounds that cracked through the quiet like fragile glass. The scent of roasted turkey and wine had turned sour in the air. I could still hear the faint click of Callista's heels against the marble as she disappeared through the doorway, swallowed by the law she had believed would never touch her. The crowd was still seated, stunned, pretending not to stare, pretending not to record. Nobody knew where to look. Not at me, not at each other. I could feel their eyes but not their sympathy. They were calculating, the way people do when a scandal drops and they're deciding which side to stand on. I straightened my shoulders and breathed in the smell of fear that lingered like cheap perfume. Her husband was the first to move. He bent over, picked up her empty glass, and muttered something about a misunderstanding. His voice cracked halfway through. The same man who used to boast that Callista could talk her way out of any storm now looked like he'd drowned in it. He didn't look at me, not once. The quartet began to pack their instruments quietly. Someone coughed. A woman whispered, "What happens now?" and another hissed, "Don't film it, for God's sake." I didn't answer any of them. I didn't say a word. The chandelier lights flickered once, as if the house itself was exhaling. I watched the red stain on the floor spreading slowly toward my shoes. It was still warm. A perfect metaphor, her chaos seeping into everything, even in absence. For years she'd been the one people called graceful, generous, brilliant. They said her name like a charm. They said mine like an afterthought. But tonight, the sound of my no was louder than her entire reputation. I wasn't sure whether that terrified me or freed me. A hand brushed my arm. My mother's. She was trembling. Her voice came out small. "Why didn't you just apologize, Seraphine? You could have avoided all this mess." "All this mess?" I repeated softly. "She humiliated me in front of everyone." "She's your sister," my mother said. "You should have just let it go." The words landed like stones. I wanted to ask how many things I'd already let go. Every time I was told to keep peace, to not upset Callista, to remember that she had more to lose. I wondered if they ever realized how much I had already lost trying to make space for her. My mother sighed and turned away. She didn't follow the FBI. She didn't even look in their direction. Maybe denial was easier. It always had been. I stood there until the last guest began to shuffle out. Their heels and dress shoes clacked in uneven rhythm, a slow migration of discomfort. My uncle patted my shoulder once, didn't meet my eyes, and whispered, "You shouldn't have said anything, honey." No one ever does when it's inconvenient. The house felt bigger without her voice filling it. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the whisper of gossip leaking out the front door, it was all louder than the music had been. When the room finally emptied, I stepped onto the porch. Cold air brushed my face, cutting through the heat that had clung to me all night. The moon hung low, soft and indifferent. I sat on the wooden steps, the sound of distant sirens echoing faintly. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. The night smelled like pine and something metallic, maybe guilt, maybe freedom. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, then I saw the name, Mom. I hesitated before answering. Her voice came through shaky, almost a whisper. "I saw what happened." I didn't speak. "I should have stopped her," she said quietly. "I didn't want to believe she'd do something like that to you. Not again." The porch light flickered. I closed my eyes and leaned back against the railing. "You didn't deserve any of it," she continued. "You never did." Something inside me loosened. For years, I had begged for her to say those words. Not money. Not apology. Just acknowledgement. I'm sorry it took this long, she added. I exhaled slowly, softly. Why now? Because when they took her away, I realized I'd been protecting the wrong child. The words hung between us, fragile, honest. I didn't know whether to cry or to breathe it in like medicine. I wasn't asking to be loved, I said finally. I just wanted to stop being blamed for surviving her. There was silence on the other end. Then, I know, baby. I know. Her voice trembled again, not from fear but from relief. We stayed on the line, saying nothing. The quiet between us felt less like distance and more like peace settling after a storm. Inside, I could hear muffled voices, lawyers maybe, or family still pretending to fix what was broken. The estate lights glowed through the curtains, gold bleeding into the dark like an open wound refusing to close. I didn't want to go back in. Not yet. I looked at my reflection in the window, tired eyes, steady shoulders. For once, I didn't see a ghost in the background of someone else's life. I saw a woman still standing. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It came gently, quietly, like the sound of my mother's voice on the phone, soft, late, but real. I whispered into the night, not for her, not for anyone, just for me. I believe you. And for the first time, I did. 2 days after the dinner, the world finally quieted. The noise had followed me home, gossip disguised as concern, pity masked as curiosity, but by Sunday night, even the whispers ran out of breath. Only the rain stayed. It pressed against my windows, steady and soft, as if trying to wash the last of her voice from my mind. I had spent the day trying to be still. Cleaning dishes I hadn't dirted, folding towels already folded. The kind of chores that trick you into thinking life is back to normal. But my laptop glowed on the kitchen table like an open wound. I kept glancing at it, waiting for something, maybe a sign, maybe just another problem to fix. Then it came. A ping. The subject line read, "Oops, wrong attachment." The sender's name caught me first, Tessa from accounting. My sister's assistant. The kind of woman who spoke in polite half-smiles and never met anyone's eyes for too long. I hovered over the file, the way you hover near a bruise you don't want to press. But I clicked anyway. A spreadsheet unfolded. Numbers lined up neatly like soldiers. Transfers from the company account, 12 of them, each a few $1,000s apart, labeled vaguely, consulting, event support, charitable expense. They all led to the same routing number. I didn't recognize it until I saw the header, CV Holdings. My throat tightened. The initials weren't random. They were hers. I scrolled further. Dates, signatures, digital approvals. My name was nowhere on any of it, though I still technically held a 25% stake in the company my grandfather built. My stomach turned, and I could taste metal. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to no one, she didn't even try to hide it. The rain grew louder, as if it was applauding her audacity. For a long time, I stared at the screen. I thought about closing the laptop, pretending I hadn't seen it. Pretending it wasn't mine to fix. But that instinct, the one to look away, was exactly what kept her safe for so long. So I saved the file to a flash drive and began to dig. The hours blurred. I cross-checked vendors, searched public records, even called an old coworker who still owed me a favor. By midnight, the puzzle started to form. CV Holdings wasn't a real supplier. It was a shell company registered under her married name. A fake entity used to funnel money from the family business into her personal account. She hadn't just been stealing. She had been laundering her guilt into luxury, new cars, charity galas, the beach house she swore she bought from her own savings. My hands shook. I wanted to believe it was a mistake. That maybe I was seeing patterns where there weren't any. But the evidence didn't care about feelings. It just stared back at me, cold and certain. I whispered again, softly, God, Callista. I was invisible even then, clapping for the woman who would later rob us blind. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. The glow from the screen painted the room in ghostly blue. Somewhere in that light, I felt the years collapsing, the small humiliations, the whispered doubts, the endless second chances she'd been handed while I carried the blame for everything she broke. I used to think envy was her poison. Now I realized it was entitlement. I printed the spreadsheet. My printer coughed like an old smoker, spitting out the evidence one trembling sheet at a time. I laid them out on the table, each page a confession in black ink. Post-it notes marked every transfer, every date. I drew lines with a pen until they formed a map of deceit. When I stepped back, it looked almost artistic. Almost beautiful. I laughed quietly, bitterly. This isn't about family anymore, I murmured. It's about fraud. I sat down again, staring at the pages until the letters blurred. I thought of my mother's voice 2 nights ago, soft, regretful, late. I wanted to tell her I'd found something terrible. But what good would it do? Another truth she wouldn't want to hear. I poured myself a cup of coffee even though my hands were shaking. The mug felt heavy. My reflection floated in the dark surface, tired, older, determined. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Anger was her language. I was fluent in silence now. I spoke quietly to the empty room, testing the words on my tongue. If I go after her with emotion, I lose. If I go after her with evidence, I win. It sounded simple. But the thought of destroying her made my chest ache. Not out of sympathy, but history. We were built from the same household, the same lies about appearances and reputation. If she fell, the family name fell with her. And still, I couldn't unsee the truth. I spent the next hour documenting everything, screenshots, printed files, copies of bank statements. I hid the flash drive under the loose floorboard near my desk, the one Callista never knew existed. I'd built it years ago, the same way kids build forts when they no longer trust the grown-ups. The rain eased into drizzle. The quiet after a storm. I stood at the window, watching cars slide through puddles on the street below. I imagined her in one of them, probably rehearsing her next public statement, pretending to be the victim. I could almost hear her voice, "This is a misunderstanding. You know how jealous Seraphine can be." The thought didn't hurt the way it used to. It just made me tired. I walked back to the table, touched the stack of papers. My fingers left faint smudges of ink on the edges. Proof that it was real. I thought about what came next. Telling the family. Going to the authorities. Either way, it meant war. And I'd spent most of my life avoiding conflict. But some fights choose you. For the first time, I didn't feel fear about confronting her. I felt clarity. She had taken everything, money, dignity, reputation, and wrapped it in silk, convinced no one would look beneath the shine. But I had. And now I couldn't pretend not to know. The clock ticked past 2. I gathered the papers into a folder, labeling it simply, proof. As I slid it into the drawer, I whispered to myself, gently, it's not revenge. It's accountability. The words sat heavy but right, like truth often does. Healing didn't arrive suddenly. It unfolded quietly, in small acts of courage, clicking on an email, opening a file, daring to look at the facts without blinking. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The sky looked washed clean. I knew mine wouldn't be, not yet. But this was how it started, slowly, softly, one piece of evidence at a time. I thought proof would speak louder than memory. I thought numbers, signatures, and time-stamped documents couldn't be ignored. But I forgot how skilled my family was at rewriting the truth. The day I went back to the house, the winter sun sat low behind the pines. The Grand Vance home didn't look any different from Thanksgiving night, except quieter, like even the walls were bracing for confrontation. The heavy doors opened before I could knock twice. My mother stood there in a cashmere cardigan, her perfume faint and familiar, like the memory of better years. "They're all here," she said softly. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and disapproval. My father sat at the end of the long oak table, Callista's husband beside him, and 2 uncles I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. They greeted me with polite nods, the way people do when they've already chosen sides. I placed my folder on the table, pages neatly tabbed, highlighted, arranged with care. "This won't take long," I said. "I just need you to see it." My father cleared his throat, a sound sharper than any word. "Seraphine, it's the holidays. Haven't we had enough drama for one season?" I opened the folder anyway. "This isn't drama, Dad. It's evidence." Their eyes followed my hands as I spread the pages out like a map. Wire transfers, corporate filings, account statements. I had marked the company's name, CV Holdings, circled the shell entities, drawn arrows showing where the money went. "Callista stole from us," I said evenly. "From the family company." "From you?" My father leaned back, unimpressed. "You're mistaken. These look like standard disbursements." I pushed a document toward him. "Then explain why the same vendor name appears in 3 separate years, and why it's tied to an address in Boca Raton that doesn't exist." He scanned the page, sighed, and placed it back on the pile. You've always had a flair for exaggeration, Seraphine. Maybe you should have gone into fiction writing. The room chuckled softly, except for my mother. She pressed her hands together in her lap. I felt my pulse climb, steady but sharp. This isn't imagination. It's fraud. You can see the transactions right here. Callista's husband finally spoke, voice slick and smooth. Even if that were true, do you really think she'd be so foolish? Maybe you're just reading it wrong. He smiled like it was a favor. My father nodded in agreement. You've been away from the company for a long time, honey. Maybe if you'd stayed involved, you'd understand the accounting better. I didn't stay involved because you pushed me out, I said quietly. No one responded. The silence was thick, familiar. It was the same silence that had followed every argument, every attempt to defend myself. I remembered the day I lost my position, 22, full of hope, sitting in a conference room when HR told me my role was being restructured. They'd smiled, apologized, promised to call me for future opportunities. By the time I returned home, my company ID had already been deactivated. That memory tightened in my chest now. I looked at them, the people who had let it happen, and realized they didn't even remember. To them, it was just another administrative decision. To me, it was the day I learned that loyalty meant obedience. I wasn't fired, I said softly. I was erased. My father frowned. Don't be dramatic. I smiled faintly. No, I'm finally being honest. My mother broke the tension with a sigh. Maybe if you hadn't walked away, things would have turned out differently. You can't blame everyone else for your choices. My choices. That's what they always called it when they took something from me. I glanced down at the evidence again. These aren't my choices. These are her crimes. No one moved. No one read the pages. They only stared as if the ink itself were contagious. You think this makes you better than us, don't you? One uncle muttered. Always trying to prove you're the righteous one. I straightened the papers calmly. No. I'm trying to prove I exist. He laughed, short and bitter. Oh, you exist, all right. In chaos. I'd expected anger. I hadn't expected indifference. They didn't want truth. They wanted peace, even if it was bought with deceit. My father finally leaned forward, his tone final. This conversation is over. We'll handle it privately. I looked at the stack of papers that no one had touched. You won't handle it. You'll hide it. Like you always do. My mother's voice cracked. Seraphine, please. Don't do this. She's your sister. I gathered the pages, slow and deliberate. My hands didn't shake. Being my sister doesn't make her innocent. The folder snapped shut. The sound echoed through the room like the closing of a casket. I rose from my chair. No shouting. Not theirs. Just the quiet certainty of someone done explaining themselves. Before I left, I placed one copy of the evidence at the center of the table. I'd written on the cover in black marker, "For when you're ready." No one stopped me. No one called after me. As I walked down the hallway, I caught my reflection in the mirror, the same hallway where childhood photos lined the walls. My sister's graduation portrait hung in the center, larger than all the rest. Mine was smaller, half hidden behind a floral arrangement. For years, I begged for a seat at that table, to be seen, to belong. Now, I understood the truth. You can't belong where you were never meant to exist. Outside, the air was cool, fragrant with pine. My car waited at the edge of the driveway, headlights cutting through the dusk. I took one last look at the house, windows glowing soft and warm, voices faint through the glass. They had already moved on, probably discussing how to spin this, how to make me the problem again. But they wouldn't erase me twice. I started the engine, the hum steady, grounding. I whispered to myself, gently, they can keep their table. I'll build my own. The words didn't sound bitter this time. They sounded free. The drive to the coffee shop felt longer than it should have. The roads were empty, washed clean by last night's rain. My reflection on the windshield looked calm, but my chest carried the quiet pulse of something sharper, resolve, maybe. Or the kind of anger that no longer burns, just hardens. When I pushed open the glass door, the smell of espresso and cinnamon met me first. The place was half empty, the soft hum of conversation blending with the hiss of the milk steamer. Callista was already there, sitting by the window in a cream coat, posture perfect, like she'd been posing for a portrait. She looked up when she saw me, the corners of her lips curving into that same rehearsed smirk I'd grown up with. "Well," she said, lifting her cup. "Should I order you a latte or a subpoena?" Her voice carried easily, polished and sweetened for an audience that didn't exist. "Neither," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I'm not here to prove anything. I'm here to warn you." Her brows lifted, amused. "A warning? That's rich. You always did love the drama." "I'm not the one living it," I said quietly. She leaned back, crossing her legs. "You think a few spreadsheets and angry words make you some kind of moral authority? You're out of your depth, Seraphine. Always have been." Her tone was smooth, practiced, the kind of manipulation that had once kept me small. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I folded my hands on the table, steady. "You can fix this, Callista. Step down from the company, return what you stole, and walk away before the rest of it comes out." She laughed, sharp and short. "You wouldn't do that to your own family. You already did." For a moment, the mask cracked. Her eyes narrowed, just slightly. Then she leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. "You're bluffing." "I'm not," I said. "I have everything I need. And this time, I won't stay quiet." There was no shouting. No tetrix. Just the sound of her bracelet sliding against the table as she gripped her cup too tightly. "You're really going to drag our name through the mud?" she asked. I met her gaze. "The mud's already there. I'm just refusing to drown in it with you." The silence that followed was heavier than anger. I could hear the soft clink of spoons behind the counter, the hum of the heater, the rain starting again outside. She looked away first. "That was new. You know," she said finally, voice cool again, "you've always been jealous." I had the looks, the charm, the drive. "You had what, exactly?" "A victim complex." "I had integrity," I said. "And that's something you can't buy back once it's gone." Her laugh was brittle now. "Integrity doesn't pay bills, sweetheart." "It does something better," I replied softly. "It lets you sleep at night." Her smile faded. "You think people care about your version of the truth? They'll believe what I tell them. They always do." I felt my lips curve, not in anger, but pity. "Not this time." I stood, dropping a few bills on the table for my coffee. "You have a choice. Use it while you still can." As I turned to leave, she called out, "You're making a mistake." I didn't look back. So did you. The cold air outside felt cleaner than the warmth of the cafe. I walked to my car, each step lighter, though I knew the real storm hadn't begun. It started 3 days later. The first rumor appeared online, a whisper disguised as concern. Someone posted that I'd leaked false accusations out of resentment. A second account claimed I'd been mentally unstable for years. The timing was perfect, the wording familiar. Callista had always known how to play the public like a piano. Then came the letters, an unexpected tax audit notice, a bank inquiry about irregular activity. My neighbor mentioned a social worker stopping by her house, asking about strange noises from my apartment. The web tightened fast, invisible but deliberate. Lysander called that night. His voice was low, urgent. "They're activating their network," he said. I leaned against the counter, the phone warm against my cheek. "Let them." "Seraphine, you don't understand. Callista's husband has friends in government circles. They'll twist this." I smiled faintly. "They've been twisting it my whole life. I'm done trying to straighten it out for them." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not scared?" I admitted. "For a long time. But fear only works if you believe you still owe them something." The line went silent, just our breathing between the static. "Be careful," he said finally. "People like her don't fight fair." "Neither do I," I said softly. "Not anymore." After the call, I sat by the window. The city lights blurred through the rain, reflections stretching like thin veins of gold. Every sound, the ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, felt amplified, grounding. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who apologized for existing too loudly, who waited for permission to be right. She wouldn't recognize this version of me. And maybe that was the point. I opened my laptop, checking the backup folder labeled proof. Every file was still there, untouched. I closed it gently. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't chasing justice for pride. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about survival, about protecting what little integrity I had left from being rewritten again. This wasn't vengeance. This was defense. And as the rain began to fall harder against the glass, I realized something quietly, almost tenderly. Sometimes standing your ground isn't loud or glorious. Sometimes it's just choosing not to kneel again. The morning after my warning to Callista, I woke to find the world a little louder. My phone buzzed before sunrise, messages, missed calls, headlines that didn't belong to me but carried my name. I sat up slowly, the sheets cold against my skin, and reached for the phone. The first thing I saw was an article, estranged daughter of the Vance family accuses sister of fraud. Beneath it, a smiling photo of Callista, hair perfect, eyes soft, looking like the victim of an unfair world. My stomach turned as I scrolled. The story painted me as a bitter woman, jealous of her sister's success, desperate for attention. It quoted family sources. I didn't need to guess who. They'd always been experts at rewriting stories. I just underestimated how fast they could publish one. I threw on a sweater and walked to the kitchen. The sky outside was dull gray, the kind that hides the sun but lets the light in anyway. The table was still covered with documents, spreadsheets, printouts, notes scribbled in my handwriting. My life reduced to black ink and quiet fury. I turned on my laptop, hand steady this time. I wasn't surprised to see the email waiting for me. It came from the family attorney, subject line, inheritance clarification. I opened it. One paragraph. Clinical. Cold. Per recent revisions, all Vance family assets and corporate shares are now under the management of Callista Vance. Your prior involvement was formally dissolved 5 years ago. My name wasn't on a single line. I read it twice. My throat burned. The papers in my hands trembled slightly. I had been erased from my own legacy. Not by chance. By design. A flash of memory, my father 5 years ago, leaning back in his chair, telling me, "You should focus on your own life, Seraphine. This one's handled." I'd thought he was protecting me from company politics. Now I realized he was protecting her. The pen that signed me away wore his watch. The realization landed quietly but deep. Like a bruise that doesn't show right away but hurts when you breathe. I pressed my palms against the table, grounding myself. If they wanted to write me out, fine. But they wouldn't bury the truth along with me. I grabbed the manila folder marked proof, the same one I'd shown them. Inside were digital backups, notarized copies, everything I'd need to show the world who Callista really was. I didn't go to a lawyer. I went to the press. The newsroom smelled like coffee and urgency. Desks cluttered with monitors and paper cups. I felt out of place, an outsider carrying her life in an envelope. A young editor with ink on her hands met me at the door. "You said you have something?" she asked. I nodded and handed her the folder. "You want a story about corruption, cover-ups, and family betrayal, with proof? Here's your headline." She opened it slowly, reading through the files. The silence stretched. Then her eyes widened. "This," she said quietly, "this isn't just a scandal. This is a case." I didn't smile. I didn't need to. "Then do what you do best." When I left the building, the air felt sharper. The clouds had started to break, streaks of sunlight cutting through the gray. I drove home in silence, the kind that hums like electricity under the skin. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was buzzing again. The story had gone live. Screenshots, spreadsheets, transaction logs, all published. Each piece of evidence cross-verified, time-stamped, undeniable. The headline read, "The Vance Fortune, a family built on deception." Within hours, the internet caught fire. Vancegate started trending before noon. Strangers debated whether I was brave or cruel. Talk shows speculated on family betrayal. Old photos resurfaced, me and Callista as children, smiling side by side, before we learned how envy could hollow love. I didn't read the comments. I didn't need to. The truth was finally breathing on its own. By evening, Callista's lawyer stood before cameras in a tailored suit, his expression calm, rehearsed. "These are baseless accusations," he said. "A private family matter exploited by a disgruntled relative." Disgruntled. That was their word for truth they couldn't control. Reporters shouted questions. He gave none of them answers. I watched from my couch, coffee cooling in my hands. My reflection flickered on the dark TV screen, a woman unrecognizable from the one who once trembled at her sister's name. I thought about how fragile power really was. All it takes is one document, one click, one breath of courage to bring down a castle built on silence. My phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number: "You've made a mistake. You don't know who you're dealing with." No signature. No need. I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it without replying. The room was dim, but I felt the smallest flicker of light somewhere inside me. The next morning, the story hit national news. The Vance family's accounts were frozen pending investigation. Journalists camped outside the estate gates. Neighbors whispered at grocery stores. My mother called once, left a voicemail I didn't play. I wasn't ready for her voice, too soft, too late. I walked out to my balcony and watched the sunrise bleed across the horizon, quiet and patient. My world had turned upside down, but for the first time, I wasn't the one hiding in the shadows. I didn't just burn the bridge, they had burned that long ago. I lit a flare so no one else would try to cross it blind. The smoke from that fire curled upward, bright against the morning sky, and for a moment, I let myself breathe in its warmth, gently, slowly, like forgiveness waiting at the edge of something new. By the third night after the article broke, the rain had finally stopped, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. My apartment was dim except for the dull blue light of my laptop. I was halfway through deleting hate emails when another notification blinked on screen. The subject line was blank. The sender anonymous. Normally, I would have ignored it. I'd learned that curiosity is how they hook you again, baiting you into their narrative. But something about this one felt different. No threats. No insults. Just a single attachment. I hesitated before opening it, my finger hovering over the mouse. The city outside hummed quietly. Then I clicked. A folder opened to reveal a set of scanned contracts, each signed by Callista. Accompanying them were voice memos, grainy but clear enough to hear her voice. "She used everyone, including me," a second voice said. A woman's voice. Shaky but determined. "You deserve to know everything." I played the recording again, softer this time, and leaned back. The voice belonged to Tessa, the same assistant who'd once sent me the wrong email, the one that had started this unraveling. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. The truth always leaves a trail. You just need someone brave enough to stop sweeping it up. I copied the files onto a new drive and hid it under the floorboard with the rest. My stomach clenched as I realized what this meant. If Tessa was turning against Callista, then something inside their circle was cracking. And cracks, if you press hard enough, become exits. A quiet knock pulled me back. For a second, I thought I imagined it. But then it came again, 2 short taps. I opened the door to find a man in a dark coat, his hair silver at the temples. "Uncle Ray," I said, surprised. "It's been years." He smiled faintly, lines deepening around his eyes. "I know. That's why this isn't a social call." We ended up at a diner off the highway, the kind that smelled of burnt coffee and fried eggs no matter the hour. The vinyl booth creaked when we sat. He didn't order anything, just folded his hands on the table like a man who had already decided he wouldn't stay long. "She's coming for you next," he said. I managed a small, humorless smile. "She already did." "No, sweetheart," he said gently, voice carrying both warning and affection. "She's about to make it legal." He reached into his coat and slid an envelope across the table. Inside were printed emails, official memos from Callista's legal team. The words were dry and surgical: defamation suit, emotional distress, irreparable harm to reputation. "She's suing me," I whispered. Ray nodded. "And she's good at this game. She's got people who owe her favors." I stared down at the papers. My name was printed there in bold. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. "Then she's about to learn what happens when you underestimate the silent ones." He studied me for a moment, then smiled sadly. "You've got more of your mother in you than you think." When he left, I stayed a while longer, tracing the rim of my coffee cup. The window beside me reflected a stranger's face, steady, not scared. Back home, the air inside my apartment felt thick. I kicked off my shoes and was halfway to my desk when another knock came. This one was lighter, uncertain. I opened the door to find Lysander standing there. His coat was soaked, hair disheveled, eyes restless. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "Come in," I told him. He stepped inside, dripping rainwater on the floor. He looked like someone who had run from a fire but wasn't sure if it was out yet. "I kept backups," he said suddenly. "From the restaurant systems." I didn't know why. Until now. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket and set it on the counter. What's on it? I asked. Server logs. Supplier invoices. Emails between Callista and the shell vendors. It's bad, Seraphine. He rubbed his hands together, nervous. She used the restaurant accounts to move money, bigger than anything you've published. Millions, maybe. I stared at him, the realization washing over me slowly, quietly. You're sure? He nodded. I checked the timestamps myself. If this goes public, it's over for her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed, headlights flashing briefly across the window. I reached for the flash drive. It felt warm in my hand, heavier than it should have been. Why help me now? I asked. He looked down. Because she asked me to lie for her. Said no one would believe you anyway. And I almost did it. I told myself it wasn't my fight. But when I saw her spin it on the news, he paused, shaking his head. I couldn't do it. Not again. Something in me softened. Thank you. He gave a weak smile. Just promise me you'll be careful. People like her don't go down quietly. I know, I said. But neither do I. After he left, I sat on the floor with the drive in my palm. I thought about everything that had led to this moment, the lies, the manipulation, the years of silence. I wasn't just holding data. I was holding her downfall. I turned on the laptop and plugged it in. The files opened instantly, rows of transactions, signatures, and receipts. Callista's digital fingerprints everywhere. They tried to bury me. But they forgot, I was the one holding the shovel. I backed up every file twice, uploaded copies to secure storage, and wrote a single sentence in my notebook. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. As the clock ticked past midnight, I finally closed my laptop. The apartment was still except for the faint sound of rain starting again, steady and soft against the window. I exhaled, gently, feeling the weight in my chest shift into something lighter, sharper, resolve. The final confrontation wasn't planned. But when it came, I would be ready. And this time, I wouldn't come alone. I'd bring every ghost she'd created and let them speak for themselves. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and windless, the kind of silence that holds its breath before a storm. I drove back to the estate, the same road I'd taken so many times before, each trip a different version of me. This time, I wasn't coming to visit. I was coming to end something. When I stepped inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and nerves. The dining room had been stripped of its charm. The long mahogany table now held stacks of legal files and coffee cups instead of fine china. My father sat stiffly at the far end, flanked by lawyers who whispered to him like handlers. My mother twisted a handkerchief in her lap. Callista was already there. Her hair was perfect, of course. Her expression was not. I wasn't invited. I summoned myself. No one greeted me when I entered. The scrape of the chair against the floor as I pulled it out was the only sound that acknowledged my presence. The chandelier above flickered once, a nervous tremor in the light. Callista broke the silence first. We're here to put this nonsense to rest, she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone still convinced the world bent to her will. I placed my folder on the table, opened it carefully. Perfect, I said. Then let's start with the ownership transfer dated 2016, signed, backdated, and fraudulent. Her eyes darted to the papers as I unfolded them one by one. The ink glistened under the chandelier. My voice stayed calm, almost gentle. Your name appears here, along with Dad's signature. But the timestamp, well, the system doesn't lie. It was edited 6 months later. Callista scoffed. You think anyone will believe that? You've always been paranoid. I didn't flinch. Not paranoid. Prepared. I connected the projector to my laptop, the screen lighting up against the far wall. Lines of emails, deposits, account transfers filled the space between us. I clicked through the slides one at a time, steady, methodical. This is the trail, I said. Corporate transfers routed through CV Holdings, personal accounts disguised as business expenses, donations that never reached the charities they were promised to. Someone gasped. My mother whispered a prayer under her breath. My father didn't say a word. He only rubbed the bridge of his nose, the way he always did when confronted with something he couldn't manage. Enough, Callista snapped, her voice fraying. You think these theatrics will make you relevant again? I met her gaze. No. The truth already did that for me. Her lawyer stood, smoothing his tie. These accusations are unfounded. The documents could easily have been fabricated. I handed him a printed affidavit from the forensic analyst I'd hired. They weren't. He hesitated. That was all I needed. The older relatives murmured, faces turning toward one another in disbelief. Aunt Louise pressed her pearls tighter around her neck. Uncle Ray gave me the smallest nod. He'd warned me what this moment would cost, and I'd decided to pay it anyway. When I looked back at my father, his eyes were glassy. You could have come to me, he said quietly. I did, I replied. 5 years ago. You told me it was handled. I just didn't realize you meant by erasing me. He looked away. He didn't deny it. The lawyer turned to my sister. Mrs. Vance, perhaps we should end this meeting. But the voice from the corner stopped him. It belonged to one of the younger attorneys, the one who'd been silent all morning. We'll need to freeze the assets until further notice, he said. His tone was careful, almost reluctant. Pending further review of the evidence. The sound of Callista's manicured nails hitting the table was sharp enough to cut the air. You can't do that. This is my company. No, I said softly. It was ours. Her voice cracked. You think they'll believe you? You're just the one who couldn't hack it. I stepped closer, placing a single printed email in front of her. No. I'm the one who kept the receipts. The room seemed to shrink around us. For a moment, she just stared at the page, her lips trembling. Then she turned to my father. Say something, she demanded. Stop her. He stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor. He didn't look at her. I think we're done here. And he walked out of the room. The silence he left behind was deafening. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, all I felt was the quiet ache of years wasted. I glanced at my mother, her eyes wet, her lips pressed tight, and realized that even now, she was mourning a daughter who only existed in photographs and denial. I remembered the night I found her crying in the kitchen years ago, whispering apologies into the dark for something she couldn't fix. That was the night I learned silence doesn't protect anyone, it only delays the inevitable. Seraphine, she said now, voice trembling, what happens next? I closed the folder. Accountability. By afternoon, I was standing on the courthouse steps. Reporters gathered like seagulls chasing noise, cameras flashing, questions flying through the air. I said nothing. The truth didn't need a spokesperson anymore. I simply handed the sealed documents to the state investigator and walked down the steps. Behind me, the crowd stirred as a black car pulled up. The door opened. Callista emerged, sunglasses hiding her eyes, posture perfect as ever. For a brief second, she looked directly at me. You won't win, she said under her breath as officers approached. I already did, I answered quietly. The agents read her rights in full view of the press. Her jewelry caught the sunlight, glinting once before she held out her wrists. She took the stage one last time, but this time, in handcuffs. As the cameras clicked and the murmurs swelled, I turned away. The courthouse tower loomed above, its bell tolling once, low and final. The wind carried the sound through the square, brushing softly against my face. I wasn't just fighting her. I was exorcising the version of me who thought survival required silence. Walking away, I passed the reporters shouting my name. None of them knew what to ask. None of them knew that this wasn't victory, it was release. By the time I reached my car, the sun had begun to set, painting the clouds gold. I leaned against the door and closed my eyes. For the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt whole, even if it was fragile, even if it still hurt. And just like that, the house that had erased me finally knew my name. The courthouse steps emptied slowly that evening, the echo of camera shutters fading into the hum of distant traffic. By morning, the city would wake to headlines about Callista Vance, socialite, businesswoman, and felon. I didn't stay to read them. I didn't need to. The truth was already written, stamped, and sealed. A week later, I found myself walking through a corridor that smelled faintly of bleach and metal. Savannah County Correctional Facility. The sign outside still felt surreal. For years, I'd imagined her untouchable, immune to consequences, floating above accountability like smoke above fire. Now she was just another name on the visitation log. The guard led me to a narrow booth divided by glass. Callista was already there, wearing the standard beige uniform that stripped everyone of their vanity. Her hair was pulled back, and for the first time in my life, I saw her without armor, no makeup, no jewelry, no audience. Just Callista, small and pale in the harsh light. She picked up the phone first. "You came," she said, her voice quieter than I remembered. "I wanted to hear it from you," I answered, my hand gripping the receiver gently. For a long moment, we said nothing. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the space between us. Her posture slumped slightly, shoulders curved inward. "I used to dream of being you," she said finally, eyes flicking up to meet mine. "The one who didn't need everyone's approval." I swallowed. "Then why did you work so hard to break me?" Her lips parted, trembling. "Because every time you stood back up, I saw everything I'd buried in myself." It wasn't an apology. But for the first time, it sounded like the truth. I watched her fingers trace the edge of the phone cord. "Dad's not visiting, is he?" she asked. "No. Figures." She tried to smile, but it came out uneven. "He always preferred his perfect daughters." I almost reminded her that she'd made herself the favorite. That she'd built her throne out of my silence. But something stopped me. The words wouldn't heal either of us. "He's not perfect," I said instead. "None of us are." Her eyes softened for a flicker of a second. "Do you ever miss how it used to be?" "I miss the version of us that never existed," I said quietly. She nodded, tears forming but not falling. I kept telling myself it wasn't personal. That I was just doing what needed to be done. But it was always about you. There it was, the confession neither of us could undo. I let the silence linger. I didn't come to forgive her. I came to understand what survival looked like from both sides of the glass. "I'm not here to save you," I said finally. Her voice cracked. "I didn't ask you to." "No," I replied. "But you needed someone to see you. Even now." She stared down at her hands. "So what now?" "You serve your sentence," I said. "And I live mine in peace." For the first time, her shoulders dropped, as if she'd been waiting for someone to say that. When the guard tapped the glass, signaling the end of our visit, I didn't move right away. I just looked at her one last time, not the villain, not the sister I hated, but the girl who'd been told she wasn't enough and decided to make the world pay for it. "I hope you find quiet," I said softly. "Even if it's not forgiveness." I hung up the phone. She didn't. Outside, the air was crisp. I pulled my coat tighter and stepped into the afternoon light. There were no reporters, no flashing cameras, just a quiet hum of traffic and the smell of rain about to start again. She wanted a response. I gave her closure. I didn't come there to forgive her. I came to leave her behind. The following weekend, I drove to my mother's house. The backyard was the same as I remembered, worn fence, creaking swing, oak trees losing their leaves one by one. My mother sat on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw me, her eyes tired but kind. Inside, the house was still, filled with ghosts of ordinary life. I found an old box in the hall closet, tucked behind winter coats. It was labeled photos, family. I carried it out to the porch and sat beside her. We sifted through pictures, birthdays, graduations, family dinners where I was always somewhere at the edge of the frame. I stopped at one where I was a child, maybe 8, standing between my parents. My mother's hand rested on my shoulder. It was the only picture where she touched me. "You were always the strong one," she said softly, touching the photo. "I just wish we hadn't needed you to be." I felt a lump rise in my throat. I think I needed it, too. It kept me alive. We sat in silence, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore. The wind brushed through the trees gently, scattering gold leaves across the porch steps. Healing didn't arrive suddenly, it came softly, one quiet afternoon at a time. When I left, the sky was a pale orange. I drove without music, letting the hum of the engine fill the space where anger used to live. Weeks later, I stood at the doorway of a community center downtown. The sign on the wall read Women's Resource Alliance. I had been invited to lead a financial literacy workshop for women recently released from prison. As they filed into the room, some shy, some skeptical, I recognized pieces of myself in their faces. The exhaustion. The flicker of hope. I set my notes aside. "We'll start simple," I said. "Not with numbers, but with choices. The kind no one teaches you to make until you've already lost everything." They listened. Really listened. And for the first time, I understood what it meant to turn pain into purpose. After the session, one of the women stayed behind. She hesitated, then said, "You talk like someone who's lived through it. I have, I said quietly. She smiled. Then maybe there's hope for me, too. I watched her leave and felt something settle inside me, peace, maybe, or the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself anymore. I didn't need revenge. I needed rebirth. Some names get written into history through money or power. Mine would be remembered through impact. And this time, when I speak, I'm not speaking for silence anymore. And maybe that's the real story, not about revenge or even justice, but about choosing to rebuild instead of begging to belong. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you most? Tell me in the comments. And if this story spoke to something quiet inside you, subscribe. There's more to come.